Hello everyone, and welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be discussing the tragic backstories in the Pokemon anime. When I'm talking about the tragic backstories, I'm specifically referring to the Pokemon that we probably all know, maybe love, maybe don't love, but all the Pokemon who've had some sort of tragic or sad or just interesting backstory before they were captured by Ash. These Pokemon include Charmander, Chimchar, Tepig, Snivy and Froakie to an extent, Litten, and Gengar. All of these Pokemon had interesting backstories, and while I think some were handled pretty well, others I don't think were handled really well at all. And in this video, I want to discuss all of these different tragic backstory Pokemon, how I could change some of their stories and make them better, and overall, say what I think of this whole tragic backstory trope as a whole. So without further ado, let's get right into this video. So let's start from the very beginning. Of course, the very first Pokemon with this tragic backstory was Charmander. I'm not going to go too much into depth here because I think we are all aware of what Charmander's entire story was, but just to recap, we all know that Charmander was abandoned by this trainer named Damien, who left him out in the rain, and then he had to go be rescued by Ash. And as time went on, Charmander was initially very fine with Ash, he was very obedient, he was just a normal Pokemon, but of course we all know that he eventually became disobedient because he no longer respected Ash, which of course is meant to reference, the fact that in the games, traded Pokemon may stop disobeying their new trainer, so on and so forth. So I think that story was pretty well. Charmander overall handled the story well, I guess, probably because he was the first one ever, this was the first time it was being done, and overall I think it was a pretty good one. We saw his growth over time as he evolved and finally started obeying Ash again, so things were good. They took a break from this tragic backstory thing, and we didn't get another one up until Chimchar, where again, I think Chimchar's story was handled really well. We could clearly see some of the effects of the abuse from Paul and the abandonment. He would initially show fear around Paul, and he initially struggled to show his real feelings. So overall, Chimchar, of course, we know he would eventually no longer fear Paul. He would be able to call him out, challenge him to battles, and eventually defeat him in the league. So again, overall, Chimchar's story was done well. But another important thing here is I think the distance between these two stories made them a bit more acceptable. Chimchar's story happened, 2 whole generations after Charmander's did. Charmander's was back in, the 1990s. Chimchar's wouldn't happen until 2006 when Diamond and Pearl's anime was running. So overall, I think these two stories worked well because they were not only different enough, but they happened very far apart. So it was kind of going back to a fresher scene with Chimchar. We hadn't seen that in a long time. I think starting with Tepig is when things started to go downhill. First of all, my big issue with Tepig was the fact that it happened so soon after Chimchar. We literally just got this second abused fire starter story, and then they want to do it again, the third one, and they do it back to back. Like I said, at least with Charmander and Chimchar, there was a huge gap in between their stories. Tepig was right after Chimchar. It felt way too soon, like they were just coming off of this story and now they're doing it again. To me, that felt very unnecessary. It felt like they were trying too much, and I know that people say that BW had a lot of references to the original series, but I think this was just going too far. I think having another abused Firestarter after just doing it with Chimchar was really, really weird and unnecessary. It felt like they were really starting to push it at this point. But to make matters even worse, I think the biggest issue here was that even if they were going to do this story again, they didn't do it very well. Really, nothing from Tepig's personality indicated that he had been abandoned or he had this really weird, tragic backstory. Honestly, without the mention of his debut episode, or the Seamus episode where he meets his old trainer again, nothing really hinted at Tepig being abandoned or having a tragic past. Really, he didn't have anything going on to really indicate something was going on with him. It's like Charizard, him disobeying Ash, anyone can look at that and say, okay, what's going on here? Why is this Pokemon not obeying his trainer? We're gonna say something is going on, even if we don't know what it is. We're going to see something's happening there. With Chimchar, he had to adjust to training with Ash, learning a different battling style after being with Paul. Of course, he kind of adapted to Ash pretty quickly, so it wasn't too extreme, but again, we had Paul appearing constantly, so it really helped in that area that we saw Chimchar's growth with Ash, especially as he was continuing to battle Paul over and over. With Tepig, not only was he not really being, he wasn't being disobedient, he had too many issues once he joined Ash. We weren't seeing Seamus over and over in the same way we were seeing Paul. So it's really like nothing was indicating that Tepig had ever been abandoned. Tepig was just a random Pokemon. We knew that he'd been abandoned because we saw that episode where he was caught. But if you had never seen that episode, honestly speaking, would you know Tepig was abandoned? Did anything about Tepig's personality indicate to you that he had been abandoned? Again, without his debut episode, and without seeing the Seamus episode, what about his personality indicated that he'd been abandoned, or had any kind of tragic past? If you ask me, nothing. And I know some people say, well, you know, Tepig used to be kind of sad when he would lose battles, or when he would tie. If he didn't win the battle, he would be kind of sad. I mean, okay, but that's really not enough. That doesn't really indicate to me that a Pokemon has a bad, tragic backstory. Pikachu gets sad after losing battles. After contests, most Pokemon will get sad after losing the battles. Anytime Pokemon doesn't do well in something, it's usually sad. Of course they are going to be sad. They want to win and please their trainer. That to me isn't enough indication that something bad happened to Tepig, if you're asking me. So honestly, I feel like there should have just been more with Tepig's personality to indicate this backstory. Otherwise, I mean, honestly, Tepig could have literally just been Professor Juniper's Tepig, and I would not know the difference, because nothing really indicated to me that this was an abandoned Pokemon by some jerk trainer. And to continue on that note, I think it would have been far more interesting if Seamus wasn't a typical jerk trainer. He just released Tepig because he thought he was weak and useless. I personally think they should have kept Seamus's lie and just made that the true reason he got rid of Tepig. If you don't remember, Seamus lied to Tepig and said he released him because he cared for him, because he said he thought Tepig was too weak to be in battles, and he thought it would be wrong to force him to battle when he wasn't strong enough. That was the lie he told. He wasn't serious about it, but I think that would have been interesting if he was telling the truth there. If he actually believed that he was doing right by Tepig by releasing him, of course that's for the viewer and the Pokemon to decide if that's right or wrong decision, but still, I think that would have been far more interesting than just the typical, no, he's just a jerk, he just got rid of him because he's a jerk, you know, of course he's just a mean trainer. I think that was just way, way, way big of a missed opportunity. You know, he could have done so differently there if they had just said his reasons were true. Like, he wasn't just being a jerk, he was doing it in Tepig's best interest. At the very least, that would have made things more interesting than just the typical, he's like a copy of Damien and Paul. You know, he just got rid of this Pokemon because he thinks it's weak. That's just so boring, and it's so cliched by that point. We'd already gone through it 2 other times. Again, we just got through it in Sinnoh, and they're going to do it again in Unova. Sorry, but I just don't think that was good. So overall, if I were to change Tepig's story, like I said, I wouldn't have had Tepig be abandoned. I think his story was far the most inferior of the abandoned Firestarter stories at this point, and I just don't think it was necessary. And I really have to say, I don't understand why it's always the Firestarter who has to go through this. You know, when I was a child, I used to think they kept doing this because that was the only way they could get Ash a fire type. Because, you know, oh, a grass type, he can just find one in the forest. Or a water type, he can just go find one in a body of water somewhere. But it'll be hard to find a fire type, so they have to give him the Firestarter from some random person. Of course, now I realize how ridiculous that is, because in the games there are plenty of places to find fire types. They could have had Ash catch Chimchar as a wild Chimchar in the forest if they wanted to. But either way, like I said, I don't think that should have happened, because like I said, I think Chimchar's story was done well. But Tepig was not. Tepig's story really wasn't done well. To me, nothing really indicated that he'd ever been abandoned and that story meant anything. It really didn't mean much in terms of his development. So like I said, if I were to redo this, I would have just not had Tepig ever be abandoned. I think instead I would have swapped this situation with Snivy. And on that note, why don't we get into Snivy? Because Snivy also had an interesting backstory. I'm not going to say it was a tragic backstory, but I'm just going to put this in here since it ties into what I was just talking about. So, Snivy was theorized to have abandoned her trainer by Iris and Silent, but this was never really confirmed in the show because we never saw an alleged old trainer of Snivy. I remember being on different online groups back in those days when BW was airing, and everyone was speculating that at some point we would see Snivy's old trainer, because we couldn't believe that they would ever bring up that story element and us not see this trainer that Snivy abandoned. Well, lo and behold, that's exactly what they did. They alleged to us that Snivy had abandoned her trainer, but they never showed this trainer, so as far as we're aware, this whole thing was just, it's just speculation by Iris and Silent. For all we know, Snivy didn't have an old trainer, she just literally was a wild Snivy who just happened to be really strong. I mean, that may as well be the case, because there's there was never any episode for it, which to this day boggles my mind, because I don't understand why they would bring up that possibility and then never give us an episode at least confirming it. And again, with Snivy, nothing about her personality really indicated this, having abandoned a trainer before, though I'm not really even sure how they would portray that. But like I said, if it were me, I would swap Tepig and Snivy stories. I would say Snivy didn't abandon her trainer because, again, I think that's a pretty weird story element that can't really be proven unless you're going to show the trainer. I think we should have just had Snivy be abandoned. That way, we can still have Snivy with this abandonment element. She can have a backstory, but this time it'll have evidence. We'll just say Snivy is tied up somewhere or something's going on. We just see that she's abandoned, or someone mentions they just abandoned a Snivy, whatever it'll be. And also, I like this because it will switch the abandoned starter to the grass type. Like I said, I really think redoing this backstory of being abandoned with the fire type starter got really old by the time we got to Tepig. I think it was very unnecessary at that point, and I think it would have been at least an interesting shakeup to make it either the water or the grass type to be abandoned instead of the fire type starter again. So yeah, like I said, if I could redo this whole scenario, I would say that Ash got Tepig from Professor Juniper. Oshawott would probably be found at the hot springs in the same episode he was caught in. There were some hot springs going on with the Sandile, and he would just be caught there since it is a body of water and it's fitting. And Snivy could be the abandoned Pokemon that Ash catches. Like I said, I think that'll fix things because it'll take away from us redoing the abandoned fire starter again, and it'll make more sense because Snivy now, she has had a previous trainer, but now we'll have some actual evidence of it. Whether we'll see the person abandon her, or someone will say it in person to Ash. I don't know, but that's just how I would do things. And also, on that same note, with Snivy having been abandoned, I would have had actual story and plot elements to highlight her being abandoned. Would she be disobedient like Charizard? Would she have emotional issues like Chimchar? I'm not sure, but something would happen. I'm not going to go too deep into what that would be because that isn't really the point of this video. This is just to talk about the whole tragic backstory situation, in my opinion, and just give my thoughts on it. So I'm not going to go into depth on that, but just know that if I were going to be switching it to Snivy, I'd have something go on with her personality that she has to get through over the course of the entire series to reference that whole abandonment situation. Next, I wanted to talk about Froakie. Even though Froakie's backstory isn't per se tragic, because what happened to Froakie was kind of his own choice, I wanted to include it here because it is a bit of a backstory that isn't really the best, so I just want to bring it up here, since I think it does fit for this video, sort of. So, for anyone who doesn't remember, Froakie's backstory was basically that he wasn't really abandoned by his trainers. He essentially was disobedient to them because he just didn't think that they were training him well enough. They weren't really pushing him and bringing out his strength as he would have liked. So Froakie was just constantly being returned to Professor Sycamore, which, by the way, I need to just mention, why is that not something that happens with these other starters? Why did Damien just ditch Charmander out in the rain? Why did Seamus just leave Tepig out in the wild, tied up to a pole or whatever? Why didn't they just bring them to the local Pokemon professor or send them somewhere? I don't know. I thought that was kind of weird, thinking about it. I don't know why they didn't just be like Froakie's trainers and just bring him back to Sycamore or bring them back where they got them, but either way. So Froakie's backstory was that basically he was returned to Sycamore by multiple different trainers because he didn't think they were bringing out his true strength. But he thought that Ash could do that, so that's why he joined him. I think that was a pretty interesting story because, again, it is a bit different. It's not just him being abandoned, it's him being returned because, again, Froakie himself was being disobedient. He wasn't listening to them because he didn't like the way they trained him, so him being brought back to Sycamore was warranted. It was understandable that that happened to him. It wasn't unfair or anything. But I still feel like there could have been more story to go along with that. And I think something interesting could have been that maybe because Froakie was being returned by so many trainers, he couldn't really adapt to a battling style. And so maybe even though he saw potential in Ash, maybe he struggled battling with him. Like, there was an episode 3, I think, when Ash was catching Fletchling. I think there were some little bits and pieces there of Froakie being kind of, he wasn't being disobedient, but he was kind of going off on his own and not really listening to Ash that much at first because he just really wanted to do his own thing. And I could have seen something come from that. Like, I'm not saying Froakie had to be completely disobedient and not listen to Ash, but maybe sometimes if he didn't think Ash was giving him the right command, he wouldn't obey it. He would occasionally do what he thought was right and use his own better judgment. But maybe this wouldn't be the better judgment. Maybe this would come at the expense of him, getting hit or even completely losing battles. I think that could have worked. It could have showed that Froakie did have the desire to work with Ash, but maybe he just had a few struggles. Something else I think could have been cool would be maybe Froakie didn't battle well with other Pokemon. I mean, if he's being brought back to Sycamore over and over, he's probably not getting that much experience battling with his own trainers, let alone with their other Pokemon. So maybe Froakie wouldn't be the best team player. Again, we kind of saw this in that episode where he learned to cut, where Ash was trying to have him and Hawlucha battle together. We saw them having some struggles because they weren't battling well together. Maybe this could have been part of Froakie's personality, that he didn't battle well with other Pokemon since he was moved from trainer to trainer so much. And so maybe that can be what he works on for most of the series. And then by the time we get to the Olympia battle, that's finally where we see Froakie become a star team player. We see him catch Talonflame from falling. We see him take the paralysis from Talonflame without even being told to do that. Ash told him to catch Talonflame when he was falling, but he didn't tell him to take the paralysis. So this, I think, could have been a great story for Frogadier, for Froakie, Greninja, whatever. I think that could have been a great story, just him not doing too well with being a team player and then growing into that. And then finally, he's such a great supportive Pokemon. That's when he finally is also able to unlock the bond phenomenon potential that he will have when he finally evolves into Greninja. I don't know, I just think that would have been a cool idea. Now, let's get into Litten. Litten is the actual real reason I wanted to make this entire video, because I think we can all agree that Litten's tragic backstory is pretty much the craziest one out of everyone's here. First of all, his dog dies. Yep, Starlin, his best friend, his mentor, just dies, and Litten, of course, is just left alone. This was his best friend. He hung out with him every day. He brought him food because the Starlin was getting old, and Starlin was his trainer, his mentor, teaching him new moves, and then Starlin dies. And nothing happens. Literally, nothing happens as a result of this Starlin dying. I seriously thought that Litten would be very much affected by this, and don't get me wrong, he kind of was. He was sad, of course, in that episode. But after that point, nothing really came from this, and I was very shocked when this was going on in Sun and Moon. Litten, I'm not expecting him to be, crying in every episode. I know everyone grieves differently and deals with death differently, but I just thought this was kind of weird that Litten didn't seem to really think that much about Starlin after he died. He's only acknowledged twice after dying, one being in a flashback that didn't even involve Litten. Ash was having the flashback. And then there was another episode where Ash and Mallow and some of the other classmates, they reunite with the dead, essentially. Mallow reunites with her mother, and Litten, now as a Torracat, reunites with Starlin, and Starlin then teaches him a new move. I think this is where he teaches him Fire Blast. And yeah, that was nice and all, but I just feel like it was very odd that nothing else happened with Litten as a result of Starlin dying. I don't see how they missed such a big opportunity to play with Litten's emotions, his development with this. Like, just imagine if after Starlin died, Ash tried to catch Litten, but what if Litten didn't want to join him? Not because he didn't like Ash, but because he didn't want to bond with another person. Like, he was scared of bonding with someone else after just losing someone. Or maybe he does let Ash catch him, but Litten is very distant. Maybe he doesn't play with the other Pokemon, he doesn't eat with them, he doesn't spend that much time with them outside of battling and training, because he doesn't want to get close to them. He doesn't want to lose someone else. Maybe he sees Lycanroc, and Lycanroc's another canine. He doesn't want to get close to him because he's scared of losing another canine friend. Anything, something like that. I think would have been very interesting to go into, but again, they just didn't do it. They could have also done the reverse. They could have made Litten super clingy. Maybe after Starlin dies and Ash catches Litten, maybe he starts to become very, very close to Ash because he's comforted by him and he doesn't want to leave him. He doesn't want him to go away from him because he's scared of losing him. Maybe he dislikes when Ash goes off to school. That's how that happened in Sun and Moon, the school anime. But really, maybe Litten wouldn't like when Ash would leave for school because he doesn't want to be away from him because he's scared something may happen. Maybe he wants to go to school in Ash's backpack and Rowlet because he's scared of being away from him, or he doesn't like to be away from him for too long. Honestly, I think anything would have been better than what actually happened, which was nothing. Litten didn't have anything really going on with his personality to indicate being abandoned, or not being abandoned, but being, kind of abandoned, but Starlin died, he was gone, he couldn't see him anymore, he was dead. It's not like he was abandoned by a trainer who he could see again eventually. No, Stoutland died. He was never going to see him again except for, when they reunited with him in the dead. But really, I just thought that was so strange. Again, we do another tragic backstory fire starter, and this could have been really interesting, but they really didn't do anything with it. Litten's whole goal in Sun and Moon was defeating Kukui's Incineroar. He had this rivalry with Kukui's Incineroar, which was really just kind of weird. It felt like they were just, it's the same evolutionary line, so they're rivals. Like, the whole Rockruff and Lycanroc thing with Ash's Lycanroc and Gladion's. It just felt very unnecessary. I mean, I could have maybe understood it if it was him being stronger to prove his strength to Stoutland or honor him, but it didn't really seem to fit to me. So, if I were to rewrite this story, I would either do, like I said, make Litten very distant and not wanting to bond with Ash or his other Pokemon, because I think that would be very fitting, or either make him clingy, something like that, or I would probably just remove the tragic backstory entirely and just have Ash catch Litten as a lonely stray cat with no major backstory. And I know what you guys are thinking, well, that's kind of the boring option, isn't it? I, at least choose to have Litten have the death and then have it affect his personality. Yeah, I guess, but like I said already, I really am just sick of the fire starters always having these backstories. It's always the fire starter with this weird story going on. They always have to have this tragic loss in the beginning before Ash catches them. And I don't know, I think it's just gotten old at this point, so personally speaking, I think I'd really just rather remove it than keep it for the sake of it. I don't know, I feel like they could use other starters for it. Use the grass starter for once, the water starter. I just don't think all these fire starters need to constantly be losing their previous loved ones in every single series. I guess last I should kind of talk about Gengar, but I don't really think it would be fitting for me to, since you guys already know I did not watch Journeys. I didn't even know Ash's Gengar had been abandoned until I looked it up on his character page online. I really had no clue that was even a thing. Of course, since I wasn't watching Journeys, I just assumed Ash just caught this Gengar, but nope. Apparently, he was also abandoned. Apparently, he was abandoned for like 3 years or something, which is crazy long. I don't think we've ever had a abandoned Pokemon that was left out for that long, but even still, I just don't get it. Why does every Pokemon, every series, we have to have one abandoned Pokemon, it feels like? Obviously, I know that's not true, I'm just exaggerating, but it really feels like it. So, why did Gengar have to be abandoned? Why couldn't he just be a normal wild Pokemon with no tragic backstory? And to anyone who's watched Journeys, did this abandonment have any effect on Gengar's personality? I really would like to know. Like I said, I didn't watch Journeys, so I can't speak on it, but to anyone who has watched it, let me know if Gengar being abandoned had any major effect on his story, on his development, on his time with Ash. Let me know, truly. Because personally, I just think this abandonment, these tragic backstories have been done to death so much. And honestly, I think the biggest issue I have with them is that, aside from Charmander and Chimchar, it never feels like it's to the benefit of the Pokemon. It feels like it's to benefit Ash and to show off how great Ash is. Oh, Ash is such a great trainer. Ash would never release his Pokemon. Ash is so wonderful. Ash is just so great. Ash, he's so nice and sweet. He doesn't care if the Pokemon isn't the strongest. Ash is just amazing. No, guys, I'm sorry. Ash catching all these Pokemon with tragic backstories, it's just gotten annoying. I just don't feel it ever benefits the Pokemon. I feel like it is only for the purpose of just making Ash seem great. Again, Charmander was done well, Chimchar was done well, but after that, none of these Pokemon being abandoned seem to have any effect on their personality or anything for their development at all. So I'm sure you can probably guess by now that my overall opinion on these tragic backstories is that I think they far outstayed their welcome. I think Charmander was okay, I think Chimchar was done really well, but after that, I think everything pretty much went downhill. I don't think any of these backstories really helped the Pokemon in any way, shape, or form. Many of them, I think, were just a huge amount of missed opportunities that could have been so much more interesting, but just never reached their full potential. I really don't see these as being even really necessary, and honestly, with how common they occur, you'd think this was some major game feature that the anime just loved to show off in anime format. But no, this isn't even a game feature. I mean, releasing Pokemon is, but taking in some of Pokemon that had previously been released isn't so much a game feature. Outside of N's Pokemon you could catch in Black and White through special events, this really isn't even a major feature of the games. This is just something the anime seems to like to do, which I just kind of don't get. It just feels really excessive at this point, and I really just don't think it's been handled well. So overall, I really kind of would prefer that we not see so many abandoned Pokemon in the future, especially fire starters. At the very least, if they're going to continue this, please stop making it the fire starters. I really don't see why all the fire starters need the sad backstories. If we're gonna do it, can we please have it be either the other two starters or just other Pokemon entirely? If I can praise journeys at the very least, I guess I'll say it's good they did this with Gengar and not a starter, not a fire starter. But even still, I just feel like it's not necessary, unless it's going to be written well, and there's going to be some major development for the Pokemon because of it. I feel like these tragic backstories can kind of be left to the side, and we can just have the captures have different story elements surrounding them. So that's going to be essentially all for this video. Let me know what you guys thought. Do you like the tragic backstories among the Pokemon that I mentioned here? Do you think tragic backstories are okay? Do you think they're good? Do you think they're interesting? Or do you dislike them? Do you think some are handled better than others? If so, tell me which ones you liked, tell me which ones you didn't like, and how you might change them. And overall, just let me know what you guys would do if you were in charge of making these backstories in the show. But that's going to be all for this video. If you liked it, that makes me very happy, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you!